Today, I'm going to teach you how and when to use lobs in your pickleball games. Well, all a lob is a high ball that you hit over your opponents. There's a variety of different ways that you can use it. So today, I'm going to take you through offensive lobs from the kitchen, defensive lobs from the back of the court, and another type of lob that can occasionally work super well at the 3.0 to 4.0 level. Before we get into lobs though, make sure to subscribe. Before we get started though, what's important to keep in mind is that lobbing from the different parts of the court will give you different results. So the easiest place to hit a lob from is when you're at the kitchen, and the reason for that is the angle. So if you think about it, if I try to hit over my opponent when I'm at the kitchen and they're also at the kitchen, I have the best possible angle to do so. If I'm back and I try to hit the same shot, if you imagine the path of the ball is going to cross a lot closer to my opponent's paddle. So if I go for a lob here, it's just a lot easier for him to hit that ball. Most lobs, what that high level players use, are hit from this section of the court, which is why we're going to start off going over offensive lobs from the kitchen. And there's a super easy way that you can give yourself an even better angle, which I'm going to go over later in the video, so stay tuned. So now guys, we're going to go over offensive lobs from the kitchen. And the way that these arise are from a dinking situation. So just like you'd go for a speed up, if I'm in a dinking rally, one thing that I can decide to do to deviate from dinking is go for a lob, which looks like this. So instead of flicking right at the person hard with the speed up, you can go over them, which if you haven't been doing that very often, can be a huge surprise. So in terms of where to hit them, depending on your level and who you're playing against, a variety of different lobs can work. But one thing that definitely helps with the lob is taking it cross court, because when you go cross court, you have a lot more space, because if you draw an angled line to the baseline, it's a lot longer than a straight line to the baseline. So one of the best places for me to hit a lob, regardless of what side I'm on, is cross court, just because I can hit it a good amount farther and a little bit higher without making the ball go long. So that's something to consider for sure. So if I'm in a dinking rally, all a cross court lob would look like is this, taking it over the player that is diagonal from me. And what you want to try to do is hit it about 2 feet to 3 feet higher than what a person could reach. So you don't want to hit it super high into the sky, but just a little bit higher to where if they reach their paddle up, they won't be able to snag it. The goal would be to get it as close as you can to the back of the court, but you probably want to give yourself a few feet of margin so that you don't hit the ball long. So to show you what that looks like again, we're in a dinking situation, and I go for the lob over Drew. I didn't hit that one very well though, and he actually got it back. So you have to be careful. If you don't surprise them and you don't hit the lob very well, obviously the downside is that they can smash it at you. So it can be risky if you don't use it right. And another important thing to think about when you're going for a lob in terms of where you're aiming it is if you go over the backhand, it makes it a lot harder for your opponent to hit a smash. So by going over the backhand, all I mean is if I'm going for a lob, I want to try to go directly over an opposing player's backhand side. Well, they can still hit a smash if they move out of the way. You're not going directly over their dominant side, which makes it a little bit more challenging for them to get into the smash position, so it can make it a little bit more effective. So going over the backhand side from this side would look something like this. Right over Drew's backhand. I'm actually playing a righty and a lefty, so down the middle against these guys would be over the backhand. But usually you're playing a righty and a righty, so all you'd want to do is hit closer to the player on this side's backhand so that it clears above this side of their body. When it comes to lobs though, you can make cross-court lobs work, down the line lobs work, you can go over the forehand. The main thing that's going to make your lob effective is the element of surprise, which comes a lot from technique, using a flick sort of motion. I'm going to cover that later, but just know you can take your lobs anywhere depending on who you're playing against. It's really just about the element of surprise. In terms of what represents a good opportunity to go for a lob, as long as you surprise your opponents, you could pretty much go for a lob off of any dink, but there are some instances that will work better than others. One being, if your opponent ever gets drawn really close to the net, maybe for instance you hit a really short dink that just barely goes over the net, or the ball just trickles over the net, the closer your opponent is to the net, the easier it will be to hit the ball over them. So if I had a really short dink to sit here and he has to step in, it might be a good opportunity to lob him on that next shot because he's closer and he'd have to move back even farther if you wanted to hit a smash. So that's a good opportunity. Doesn't happen super often, but another good time that you can go for a lob is just if your opponent's generally off balance. So if I'm dinking with Drew here, and I get him super off the court and off balance, to dink like that, it might be a good opportunity for me to go over his backhand since he's just off the court, and maybe I don't want to go for a speed up. So if your opponent's ever really far away from their home base of their side, whether that be really far in the kitchen or far out to the side, could be a good opportunity for a lob because they're going to be moving back to their home base before they can go back to get the lob too. So if I move Drew out to the side, he's going to be coming this way and recovering. And if I hit a lob over him, he's moving sideways, which just gives him that split-second delay that he might need to hit a smash. So both good opportunities. But as I said, you can really go for a lob on any dink as long as it's surprising to your opponents. But guys, as a quick side note, I want to tell you about our product, the Mini Court. We just came out with this thing, and all it is a half net, so 10-foot long net with pre-measured kitchen lines that create the perfect kitchen. So we have a 7-foot kitchen in front of us here. And what you can do with this is set up a court to practice like we are here, anywhere you want. Right now we're in a driveway. You can do it in your basement. If you have space inside, you can set up the court. So it's really just an awesome way to give yourself the ability to practice more. As you can see here, we're doing dinks, but you can do volleys. You can even do lobs, as I'm going to show you in a second, which we're talking about in this video. So if you guys are interested in playing more at home and practicing more at home, make sure to go check this thing out. Super fun, great way to entertain people, and just get better at the game. One of the best times, though, to go for a lob is if you can hit the dink out of the air. So a lot of the time when you're dinking, right, you get dinks where you can volley dink them because maybe they're a little bit farther back, and rather than backing up, you can dink them out of the air like this. So when you get a shot like that, why it's a good opportunity to go for a lob is, one, a lot of the time you're taking those dinks a lot closer to the net. So it actually takes time away from your opponent, and then also makes your angle better. So when I'm closer to the net, I'm closer to my opponent, and I have a better angle to go over them. So a lob on a dink like that would look like this. So Sid hits it to me where I'm getting the ball out of the air, and because he has less time to react because the ball is not bouncing, it could take him by surprise even more. So if you watch pros play, a lot of the time when they're going for a lob, it's out of the air for those reasons. In terms of when not to go for a lob, there's two main times where lobs pretty much won't work. The first is if your opponent's a little bit farther back. So if for whatever reason they're standing a few steps back, it's going to be almost impossible to get the ball to go over them. So maybe for whatever reason during a dink rally, they backed up a little bit. Regardless, if I try to go over Sid when he's right here, he's just going to be able to hit a smash, like really easily. He didn't even really need to back up, and he would have been able to smash that. So if they're backed up at all, even if they're on defense, you don't want to go for the lob. The next time that you wouldn't want to go for a lob in a dinking rally is if you're off balance. So if Sid hits a dink to me that pushes me back or gets me off balance, I'm just not going to be nearly as accurate as if I'm the one in control. So I recommend going for the lob on a dink where you have time, you're on balance, you're not facing away from the court. Another thing to keep in mind, if the farther back I am, like I said, the lob's not going to be as effective. So if he pushes me back and I'm lobbing it from back here, my angle's not as good. He also has more time to react from where I'm hitting the ball. So don't recommend going for lobs if you're pushed back. Remember, the offensive lob from the kitchen is an offensive shot, and we go for offensive shots when we're in control and we have more time. And the last thing I want to cover in terms of when to hit these kinds of lobs is that you don't want to go for them too often, because that's sort of how you keep the element of surprise. If I go for 3 lobs like this, 3 points in a row, by the time I hit the third lob, my opponent's going to be hitting a smash and kill the ball. That's okay. So I think the smart way to go about this is to spread out when you use these lobs. And I wouldn't go for more than 2, 3 in a game max. So 1 a game is probably great. You don't need to be hitting this shot super often, because if you do, it becomes less surprising. And I guarantee you, by the second or third time in a row, if you do this, they're going to be hitting a smash and you're going to lose the point. So spread out when you use these lobs, and they'll be way more effective. The most important part, though, of being deceptive and surprising with your lobs is your technique or the way that you hit it. And the number one thing to make your lobs deceptive is to avoid a big backswing. So if I'm taking a big backswing for my lob, my opponent immediately knows I'm about to hit the ball harder than if I was to dink. So if I'm hitting the ball like this, and then all of a sudden I'm hitting a lob by going like that, my opponent knows I'm about to do something different, whether it be a speed up or a lob. So they're going to be extra alert that something's about to happen. So what I like to tell players, if you're about to hit your lob, you should prepare the exact same way you prepare for your dink. So if I'm hitting dinks, and I just put my power right behind the ball on my lob, I should do the exact same thing. So all the technique really is a flicking motion. So I don't want to be using too much arm. I'm really just flicking with my wrist straight up to get the power and the feel over my opponent. So it's not necessarily something that comes super quickly if you haven't done this before, but with some practice, you can get the feel of that flick and get the feel of getting it 2 to 3 feet over your opponent. Because if you hit it too low, they'll smash it. If you hit it too high, it might go out. So there's definitely a feel to using that technique, but it is very simple. If you're hitting the lob out of the air, same kind of idea. You want to prepare like you're hitting a volley dink. Then at the last second, you use that flick motion and go for the lob. And if you can, it's not 100% necessary, but if you can, adding some topspin to the lob will make it more effective. It's not always possible though, but if I can get a little bit of roll on that lob, it's going to help the ball drop a little quicker and it'll shoot away from your opponents when it bounces, but not 100% necessary. The main thing is that you don't give your opponent that tell that you're about to do something with that backswing. So regardless of whether or not it's a volley dink or a regular dink, you want to prepare for it like a normal dink and then flick up to go over them. And on the backhand, it's the same thing, and you can hit your lobs over here just as effectively. All you're doing is preparing for the dink normally, and then at the last second, you go for that lob. And I think backhands are probably a little easier out of the air. And if you're the kind of player that doesn't like your backhand, by all means, you can hit all your lobs from the forehand side. It's not a big deal. But if you do have control over your backhand, it's very effective to go for a lob on this side too. So all you're doing, same idea, prepare for your backhand dink regularly. And at the last second, you're going to flick over it more. And if you can get some topspin, bonus points. While offensive lobs from the front of the court are a great way to take control and be aggressive, defensive lobs from the back of the court are essential to staying in the point when you're on defense. So all a defensive lob is if I'm back here and I have a shot where I'm not comfortable enough to hit a drop, maybe they hit it too hard, what I can do is throw up a lob, and what that does is it gives me time to get back into position. And because lobs can go pretty high, they might go into the sun, there might be wind, you might actually get your opponent to miss their smash, which can happen pretty often because a lot of players don't have that good of smashes, or maybe it's just bad conditions. And so by using the defensive lob, you essentially are buying yourself a second life in the point. So just because your opponent has a smash does not mean the point is over. You can hit a lob off of the smash, and if you're really far off the court, you can hit a lob just to get back into the court, stay into the point, and then retake control. So if I was to give Sid a lob, here's what I would do. So by using my lob there, he hit an overhead. I wasn't necessarily comfortable enough on that first one to hit a drop, so I gave him another lob. And the next one, though, he was backed up a little bit, and I was able to hit a drop and move forward. So by using that lob, I stayed in the point, and I was actually able to get back on offense. So all you're doing with this shot, like I said, is buying yourself a second life. And the only goal here, I'd say, is the higher you can hit the lob, the harder it's going to be for your opponent. So if I go for a lob, and it just looks like this, it's not super high, he can crush it. It's not very challenging for him to do anything there. But if I go for a pretty high lob, maybe like that, the ball is dropping a lot faster when he makes contact with it, which makes it harder to time, might also push him back a little bit, making it a little bit more challenging for him. So with this lob, you're not going to probably get the ball over your opponents. You're essentially forcing them to hit a smash, and if you make it high enough, can actually be challenging for a player to make that ball in every single time and challenging for them to finish off the point. So next time you're really out of position in the point, I recommend trying the defensive sky lob. And I guarantee if you're at the 3.0 to 4.0 level, there's a very good chance you'll get back in the point and your opponents might just miss the smash. So give it a shot. So the last lob that I want to go over, a lot of players ask me if this lob is effective, is the third shot lob, which looks like this. So as the serving player, my opponent comes in and I try to use the lob, which, as you can see there, can very easily be smashed. So do I recommend going for the third shot lob? If you're a player that's at the 4.0 level or higher, I don't recommend going for it very often because, as you just saw, Sid's a 4.550 player. He took that lob and destroyed it, and that was actually a pretty good lob. So if your opponent has the ability to hit smashes really hard, if they have the ability to move quickly, the third shot lob probably isn't the best idea. I'd leave it out of your vocabulary and stick to drops and drives. But if you're playing players that don't have good responses to lob, by all means, you can use the third shot lob maybe as a changeup from your drives and your drops. I would just be careful, and you should know that in the long run, the third shot lob isn't necessarily the best shot in terms of getting to a higher level. And guys, as you can see in this video, we're in this beautiful location, so make sure to give us a comment about where you think we are. But why you might use the third shot lob is because you don't necessarily have a ton of confidence in your third shot drop. So if you want to go deeper into that shot, make sure to watch this.